All eyes continue to be on City Hall as questions rise of when will Mayor Byron Brown step down and take the top job at Western Regional off-track betting. If he does that, Buffalo Common Council President and South District Councilman Chris Scanlon will then take over as Mayor of Buffalo according to the charter.
So who would take over Scanlon's district? That is the question Councilwoman Leah Halton-Pope brought up at today's council meeting. She joins us now to talk more about this. Leah, thank you so much for coming in this afternoon.
My pleasure.
So before we talk about this resolution, there's been for a while now speculation about who will do what and what that would mean for this and that. What is, I know you can't speak for other council members, but what is the general feeling in the Common Council right now with everything going on?
I can't, as you said, I can't speak to anybody about where they stand on the issue. I can only speak to the concerns that I have as the Ellicott District Representative and Majority Leader for the Common Council. Prior to being elected, prior to coming in January and being sworn in, I started asking these questions. What do we do? What does the charter say? So reading it, it looks like it answers the question about vacancies, but not necessarily temporary vacancies. There are some, and this is both probably on the council and in the public at large, that believe that the charter already deals with the vacancy issue. What I would argue is there's no provision for a temporary vacancy, which is what would happen should the mayor accept the position and vacate his seat. Then the current council president would then move up in an acting role. You cannot be an acting mayor without being council president. You can't be council president without being a council member. And so he's not vacating his seat, he's just temporarily vacating, and he cannot vote on issues before the council and be the chief executive officer for the city. So my opinion is that there's no definition there. We need to probably figure out, is this something that can be addressed? And so I submitted a resolution that asks Corporation Council to put something formally together to let us know, is this something that the charter answers? I'm not an attorney, you are. Is this something that's answered in the charter already? Or do we need to put together legislation or amendment to the charter? And so it asked for those two things specifically, a draft amendment in the event that her opinion is that we do need to do something, and then if not, then the draft is no longer needed.
And now it gives the council options for what they could do, because all of this is set up by Byron Brown potentially leaving his office early, which would then sort of effectuate the dominoes for him and Chris Scanlon to vacate his seat early. So we're talking about a period of 16 months.
Yes.
Where not only the South District would not have representation, they would not have a council member, even though they would have Chris Scanlon in the mayor's office, they wouldn't have a council member, and it would be going into a critical time when big decisions need to be made, particularly the budget, which we'll get to in just a minute. But you're talking about setting up an 8-person or a 4v4 anytime you have an even number. That sets up potential problems in the spring.
And this isn't about current members sitting in seats. This is not about the current mayor. This is about a system overall for the city of Buffalo. And so I would hope that we would be more deliberative in how we think this through. This could have been Ellicott, this could have been Niagara, this could have been any of our districts that would now not have representation. And we have issues that are, yes, the budget is critical, but then we also have infrastructure issues, other quality of life issues that need to be addressed. And as a representative for Ellicott and being in leadership, yes, of course I care about every district, but I cannot speak to the needs of a specific district like one who currently lives, breathes, and exists in that district. And so this is my ask for the Corporation Council to just let us know, is this something we can do or should do? And if it's not, then I'll respect that, but what needs to happen? And it's about balancing power. The legislative body is independent from the executive, and while we are all together right now, you'll be in a different branch. And his opinion is not to just look at one district, his or her, depending on who the mayors are. Sure. It is to look at the entire city. And so all of your resources, time, and energy can't be based on the district that you came from. One could argue that the current mayor already lives in one district and therefore could have influence, but that is not necessarily accurate. It's across the city.
Leah, you kind of touched on this before, the city's current financial situation, and this is kind of a way maybe we could rope this topic in. Is there a more sense of urgency now to kind of get this plan in place, given the city's financial status right now?
Yeah, so the reason, and this was a late file that I did, but the reason that I'm asking for an opinion sooner rather than later is I'm concerned. We have not been with the 16-month vacancy at all on the council that in my lifetime, I think the longest might have been 6 months, and the current council president was the one who was appointed in that period. And I would like to add, I think when he was appointed, it was days before the budget, and he had to vote on a critical budget then with only 4 days to prepare. And so by thinking about it now, we're being deliberative. It's trying to create a conversation that's also public, because I think that's really important for the community as a whole. The city of Buffalo needs to know what's going on. And should this happen again in the future, protecting ourselves to make sure that we don't fall into the same situation. If you remember, the council president was initially an at-large position.
Yeah.
And once that was changed in the early 2000s, this is how we got to this position now.
Without having to be able to get into the nitty-gritty, because I know we're still a couple of months away from officially budget season, but the city is staring down the barrel of a $40+ million budget hole. What kinds of tough decisions? And again, we're talking globally here, globally.
Yeah.
Unless you have something more specific in mind, but I'll give you the globally. What kinds of tough decisions should people who live in the city of Buffalo, who depend on its resources, what should they be expecting going into the spring?
Well, we've already had to deal with going over the 2% tax cap. That's likely to come up. The council, we dealt with that by adding a deadline for the administration to submit in advance by on or before March 1st if there was going to be an increase over that 2% tax cap, which based on our potential debt that we might have, this shortfall that we may have next year and will likely have, that's going to impact constituents. But these are quality of life issues and resources that are critical to every single constituent, regardless of where we live in the city of Buffalo. How is this going to impact you? And so it's our job as a legislative body and those who are closest to the people that we represent to make sure that we have their clear conversations with them. These are critical resources that can impact you. Quality of life issues, all of these things play into it. And if we don't have the resources, what gets cut? That's something to discuss.
Another side of this, last week, you and Councilman Mitch Nowakowski, you sent a letter to city officials talking about contracts and collections of fees and payments. Kind of maybe give us the nuts and bolts of that for anyone who may be unfamiliar. And have you heard any response yet from other city officials?
So we have not heard yet from anybody, although I do believe we will. The reason that we focused on it was there are several contracts that we saw in the city's roles that are started to come up, like the Marina, Sue's Deli, AMR, which you've heard about, and Spectrum, although I believe Spectrum is being dealt with now, and we're close to an answer if I'm not mistaken. But these are revenue generating contracts, and so in a financial crisis, which I'm not saying that this is where we are just yet, but we definitely have some financial issues to address. These are some revenue generating stopgaps that we need to address and look at. And it's not just these four, but are there any other contracts that need to be addressed overall? Are we spending money unnecessarily?
All right, Buffalo Common Councilwoman Leah Halton-Pope, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.